So, we are getting closer to the end of these two really interesting, super interesting days on the topic Science for Sustainability. It has been a pleasure to follow up presentations and session, and I already now want to thank all who has participated and contributed for this event. I think that this kind of like a discussion which are really crossing our borders are super interesting and very important for our sustainability future. Just I want to remind that we will have one really super interesting keynote, and after that there are still one sessions ongoing, so please also attend those ones. But now it's my great pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker. Pauliina Damdimopoulou is a professor of reproductive biology at Karolinska Institutet at Stockholm. She earned her PhD in 2008 from University of Turku, Finland, and trained as a postdoc in France and in KI. Since 2014, she has led the chemicals and female fertility laboratory at KI. We have heard really interesting sessions and presentations about these emergencies, which have opened different views for sustainability and sustainable future. And I think that Pauliina's talk will also provide one really important issue linking to the humankind, our future as a humankind, and is that then the good or bad future that Pauliina is open to us. So welcome, Pauliina.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's, of course, a very big pleasure to be here. So my presentation will focus on the part of the sustainability crisis that we all even carry within our very bodies. And this is the human-made chemicals that we keep producing and introducing to the environment. So my name is Pauliina Damdimopoulou, and I come from Karolinska Institute, where I lead the research lab called Chemicals and Female Fertility. And I want to begin by thanking all my wonderful team members, the funding I have, and of course the collaborations that make my research possible. So we all know here that we are in the middle of a huge environmental crisis, and different concepts have been introduced to describe all the parts of it. And one of these is the United Nations Environmental Programme term called triple planetary crisis. The two first parts of this triple crisis are the climate change and biodiversity loss that we have discussed extensively here at this event as well. But the third part, which is my personal favorite, is the pollution. And this receives less attention, although it is an integral part of the sustainability challenges we're facing. So it relates to our ability to generate new materials and chemicals at the level that we basically now have more plastics in the world than we have animals. And we have more houses and infrastructure than we have trees. And this is all thanks to the chemical revolution that started following the world wars. In this graph you can see now in green the sales of the global chemical industry, and in orange the production of plastics since 1950s. And these curves are pointing upwards, and what is important to understand is that the picture we have today is only a snapshot within this development that is accelerating unless we want to do something about it. And it all started when the industry promised us better things for better living through chemistry. And they delivered to the point where it is impossible to imagine how our lives would be without the many products and innovations of these industries. Human-made materials and chemicals enabled the cars, the mobile phones, food production, pharmaceuticals, consumer products, cosmetics, and of course, plastics. And plastics and chemicals are really tightly interlinked. In the production of plastics, at least 16,000 different chemicals are used. And we know that many of these are non-toxic chemicals, but we keep using them anyway. The problem becomes when then, sooner or later, during the life cycle of these products, the chemicals end up in the environment. And here the awareness is rising. We can see this news almost every week now. For example, we have the forever chemicals PFAS in the global rainwater at levels that exceed what we think is safe for human drinking water. Microplastics is found in new organs every week. Here, an example, human brains. And of course, the production of plastics and chemicals is based on crude oil. So fossil oil is used to derive the chemicals and plastics. So these also contribute to the climate change and air pollution. And air pollution particles reach our bodies even before we're born. There's air pollution particles in the lungs of fetuses before they take their first breath. So we are all accepted by these chemicals in the environment. So the question is, what might be the consequences of this? And we have a lot of examples from animals since decades back. Here close to us, we have the Baltic seals that nearly went extinct in the 60s, and of course the eagles that also nearly disappeared, both in Northern Europe and Northern Americas. And this was a combination of hunting, but also the pollution with organochlorine chemicals like PCBs and pesticides like the Nobel Prize-winning DDT. All kinds of animals are affected. Sea snails are affected by chemicals in the water in the harbors, and reptilians are very sensitive to pesticides in the environment, and also fishes. And in all these known examples of population collapses due to pollution, it is the reproductive systems that are affected. There's lesions in the female reproductive organs, underdeveloped male reproductive organs, poor quality eggs, and poor offspring survival. And if the environment is cleaned, the populations can recover. And it was observations like these that led to the awareness of the problem when the book Silent Spring was published in the 60s. This outlined the problems with uncontrolled use of organochlorine pesticides and led to such a public movement that finally the first environmental protection agencies were started, and the idea was born that, hey, maybe we should test these chemicals for safety before we spray them in the environment. So now the endpoints in Silent Spring were very dire. It was deaths, sterility, and population collapses. And over the years, we learned that toxicity of chemicals is more like a continuum of many different things. And another book in the 90s called Our Stolen Future introduced the concept of endocrine disruption. For some reason, many chemicals we release to the environment can interfere with the hormones in our bodies. And hormones are very important for development, fertility, the cognitive function, and metabolism. So if these are disrupted, then consequences will follow. And in the 90s, the authors were asking, are we threatening our fertility, intelligence, and survival? And this is a very good question that we can still keep asking. So how does it look like? When it comes to fertility, yes, human fertility rates are going down globally. This is a graph that shows you the births per woman in different parts of the world since 70 years back. And for a population to remain stable, every woman needs to have 2.1 children. And you can see immediately that, for example, Europe and the US have remained below this threshold for the past decades. And even Asia is now below this one. So fertility rates are truly declining. The lowest ones are in Korea, 0.8 children per woman, and Finland is among the lowest ones in Europe, 1.3 babies per woman. So fertility is going down. Is this now due to the chemicals? Well, that's the question we have to explore. And fertility is a sum of so many things, so we need other types of statistics to know if actually infertility is also increasing. And a good statistic we have is the use of assisted reproductive technologies. So first of all, infertility is defined by trying to achieve pregnancy for at least 12 months without succeeding. This is when the diagnosis infertility can be given, and this is when you can get access to tax-funded infertility treatments if you live in a place like Finland or Sweden. So these technologies have been around since the 80s, and there's at least 10 million ART babies, or assisted reproductive technology babies, in the world. And this sector is growing 5 to 10% a year, both in terms of treatment cycles, but also in terms of the money in this business. And when it comes to Finland, we're again topping the chart. This is the country where we're among the biggest in the world in having the highest proportion of births due to assisted reproduction. In 2023, 7% of babies were born due to these technologies. That means that there's an ART child in every classroom. And despite these high numbers, many remain childless. Depending on how you count, up to a third of the couples entering treatments are not going to have a child in the end. So here the question is again, is this maybe due to the chemicals? And I'm going to turn the question around. How do we make sure that the chemicals we use are not harming fertility and reproduction? So a couple of words about the testing and monitoring of chemicals. we've known now, we've had the Environmental Protection Agency since the 70s. We must be so good at this by now. Sadly, this is not the case. We don't even know how many chemicals we have on the market globally. Depending on what paper you read, it's between 100,000 and 350,000 human-made chemicals and mixtures on the market. The good news is that we are in the EU. We have the best chemical legislation in the world because we have one. There is also a strong ambition that our chemicals should be safe by 2050. And this we guarantee by giving the responsibility to the industry. The ones producing chemicals and putting them on the market must guarantee that their products are safe. And this is how it looks like, a picture taken from the European Chemical Strategy for Sustainability published 5 years ago. We have those 100,000 chemicals, and 70% of them have been poorly characterized. 70,000 chemicals that might be safe, maybe not, we don't have a clue because we didn't test. The top of the iceberg is 500 chemicals that have been tested following all the requirements that are very, very well characterized. And even then the question remains, did we test for right things? When it comes to human fertility, are we covering all the bases? So human fertility has been studied a lot in the context of environmental pollution, but the focus has been on the male. And this is because in the 90s, around the time of Our Stolen Future, the first papers came out from Denmark suggesting that semen quality is going down. This was criticized at first, but it has been confirmed in multiple studies in different regions ever since. And we now know that sperm concentrations are declining about 1% every year. And we know that there's chemicals in the environment that reduce androgen signaling, that is testosterone, which is crucial for the baby boy, for the fetus, to develop normally functioning reproductive organs. So if the baby boy in the mother's womb is exposed, there's too little testosterone, and the masculinization process doesn't work out properly, and the consequence is higher risk for infertility in adult life. And this has been developed to the point where we actually use this as metrics when we measure reproductive toxicity of chemicals. Guideline assays contain many endpoints for male fertility, and when we carry out risk assessment, for example, of phthalates, it is now based on protection of male fertility. And that's fantastic news for guys. But there's not really a shortage of sperm in this world. In theory, every man in this room makes 1,000 new sperms every second. The most fertile woman in this room makes 1 oocyte a month, and her fertility stops in sterility midlife. So female fertility is pretty much more limited compared to the male fertility. And even if we know this, we don't really use female fertility relevant endpoints when we test the chemicals or carry out risk assessment, because we basically don't really know what to test or do. It's come to a point where some researchers say that women are simply not sensitive to environmental exposures. And I want to tell you today that this is not scientifically based conclusion, it's simply a knowledge gap. So my research in Sweden has focused a lot on looking at chemical exposures in women and their fertility. And this slide shows you levels of 62 toxic chemicals in ovaries of 185 women. You see many things here. The size of the dot tells you how many of the women in the cohort had the chemical, full circle, all of them. The color tells you about the concentration. Top row. Persistent organic pollutants that nearly killed the seals and the eagles are still found in ovaries of every single woman. PCBs and DDT are there. This is because they're very, very persistent chemicals. We live long lives and they persist in the food chain. Next to them we have the PFAS chemicals that are even more stable. There's thousands of them. We measured 8. We find them in every woman in higher concentrations, and only a couple of them have been restricted recently. So these chemicals will be with us for a long time. Bottom row are chemicals like phthalates and bisphenols and parabens that are metabolized very quickly. You're exposed, you pee them out. But we're exposed continuously, so we can measure them even inside the ovaries. To my knowledge, there's no global restrictions for these chemicals, so they are widely used in consumer products and cosmetics. We find especially phthalates and parabens in ovaries. So human eggs reside and grow in an environment full of non-toxic chemicals, and probably many more because we didn't measure the 100,000 on the market. It is, of course, important to see if these levels matter, and in the Swedish women that we looked at, we find many associations. Women with more chemicals have fewer immature eggs left in their ovaries. The way these eggs grow to ovulation is disrupted, resulting embryo quality is lower, and all this leads to the fact that it takes a bit longer time to get pregnant, and that of course increases the odds of being diagnosed as infertile. And this isn't very shocking. It's confirmed in many other studies as well that chemical pollution matters for female reproductive health and fertility. And there's so much evidence that even the clinical community is now getting concerned. The doctors have started caring about environmental contaminants. In many recent reviews, it's been summarized that there seems to be connections not only with fertility, but the function of the reproductive organs at large. Chemicals are connected to disrupted puberty, uterine fibroids, endometriosis, PCOS, and earlier reproductive senescence. And maybe we should start considering this when we consult the patients, are the doctors saying. So this is fantastic. We have awareness and we have data. We know that there's a problem. So how do we now get to this chemically safe environment by 2050 is the big question. Is there really any hope? I'll give a couple of examples of what I think matters. And the first one of them relates to the importance of measuring the right things. And I will use here the chemical PFOS, which is the poster child of the large family of the forever chemicals that has been in commercial use since the 50s, firefighting foam, non-sticky, water-resistant clothing and so forth. It ends up in the food, and hence it's the European Food Safety Authority that will determine how much of that we can eat without having a problem. And the first risk assessment they did was published in 2008. Then we had data available that PFOS exposure disrupts thyroid and cholesterol in monkeys. If we use that as the critical effect, the safe level of exposure is calculated to be 1,000 nanograms per kilo per week. And EFSA said, well, this is a very high exposure level. Nobody's facing this in Europe. We have no problems. Data accumulated. 10 years later, EFSA updated the risk assessment. Now we had data from humans, so showing the associations between exposure and cholesterol in actual humans. And if this is used as a critical effect, this led to a lowering of the safe level of exposure by 100-fold. Now it was fine to be exposed to 13 nanograms per kilo per week. And now we're starting to have a problem. Some people actually are exposed like this. Only 2 years later, another update followed. Now we had learned that actually these chemicals are immunotoxic. They reduce vaccination response in children, and many of them have this effect. So now EFSA said that the combination of 4 common PFAS chemicals, the safe level exposure is 4.4 nanograms per kilo per week. And now we have a problem because we are exposed to these levels. So a chemical that has been on the market since the 50s went from being no problemo into a huge public health issue, environmental mitigation problem. Estimates say we need 2 trillion euros and 10 years' time to clean up Europe if we stop producing these chemicals now. And just because we were not measuring the right things earlier. When it comes to female reproduction, it's usually not mentioned in any of these because we do not have enough data. And I know we always say more research is needed, but here I sincerely think we need more research to understand what are the critical effects relating to female reproductive health that should be assessed, and how do we develop tests for that so that we can measure the chemicals before they enter the market. This will take time. So the most common question I get asked after this is like, oh my God, what can I do? What can I do? How can I change my lifestyle? And we've looked into that as well. Self-reported lifestyle and chemicals in ovaries. Do we find any associations? We do. You can see all the results here. On the right side, you have the PFOS chemicals, and on the left side, you have the phthalates, and then the y-axis shows you the self-reported lifestyle that shows correlations. There's 3 important things. First of all, women who use perfume more often have more phthalates in their ovaries. And this is not surprising because phthalates are used in cosmetics and as fragrance carriers in perfumes. And it's easy to tell, well, just stop using these products and you'll have lower levels. It becomes more complicated where we also find that women who eat more fish and more eggs have more PFAS in their ovaries. This is not surprising because PFAS are in the fish and the eggs, but we cannot start telling women to stop eating fish and eggs to have less chemicals in their ovaries. This is not very sustainable. So it shows the complexity of the chemical landscape we have created. Exposures are often unavoidable, and the lifestyle changes can only affect some of them. And this is why I really think that the vision of the chemically safe environment can be only reached through regulation, not by advising people how to live their life. Ideally, we have a society where we can go to the store and buy whatever we need without being scared that it contains toxic chemicals or damages the planet. And these type of regulations need to be international because pollution doesn't respect any country borders. So the hope for humanity, I think, is in the movement we hopefully can create. Just like Silent Spring and Our Stolen Future sparked such a strong outcry that there was no choice but to make things better through the agencies, I think we need something similar now. People need to get really upset about the situation and basically start choosing smart so that we affect the market. We have to start advocating and educating so that everybody understands the scope of the problem. And we really have to think about this when we vote, to get those decision makers in power who actually want to make the changes needed to reach the chemically safe environment. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Pauliina. This was really like awakening call for everyone. I'm really happy that I'm so old, so I feel that, well, perhaps I haven't had so much chemical exposure, I don't know. But this is really scary in a way, but also shows that, well, we need good science, we need more knowledge, as well as then a good regulation based on this new knowledge. So this is super, super important. I think that we have time for one question. Who wants to ask something from Pauliina? Yes.
Cheers. It was lovely to hear you, Pauliina. We are from the same place, food chemistry, University of Turku. Two things in mind. Chemically safe world by 2050. That's 25 years from this moment. Are we still alive? And then secondly, your belief that we need better institutions and legislations. It took 12 bloody years to forbid bisphenol A from food containers, even if there was evidence. And the threshold value was reduced by factor 20,000. So exactly the example you showed there. So how do you see we really can do this so that we are still alive in 25 years?
Wonderful question. So bisphenol A actually started with the consumer movement. It was removed from baby bottles because the consumers wanted to have products without this chemical, so then the industry responded by having that. Of course, they replaced bisphenol A with bisphenol S, so it didn't become better, but it shows that consumer choices can affect what is on the market. Bisphenol A, I think, is still regarded as safe in the US, so Europe at least has a bit more a precautionary principle in play. And how going to make sure we're alive, I don't know, but maybe my kids will be, and I really want to have that at least hope for the safer environment for them. And change is slow. Chemical Strategy for Sustainability had a very nice roadmap how these changes will be implemented. And it was the change of the European Parliament that led to the down prioritization of the safe environment on the cost of the European chemicals industry. Because it's all about the competitiveness, right? If the industry moves to Asia, we will not be competitive anymore, so let's keep producing chemicals. So this is why I think we have to take all the chances we get for the lobbying. I've got the opportunity to go to Brussels a couple of times to talk to the decision makers, and they have no clue. Human health effects are not even discussed when they decide about chemical legislation or the plastics treaty. After 3 years of negotiations on global plastics treaty, it didn't work out because Russia, Saudi Arabia, was it United States as well, don't really want to curb the production because that's bad for the oil industry. So we have these economical interests at play that will keep playing strongly unless we really start shouting. So I don't want people to get scared. I want them to get really upset. That's what I want.
Thanks, Pauliina. This is a good way to end.